So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay to a map that I don't believe I've ever seen before, which is kind of interesting. It's a rather grey and dark day, sort of at the break of dawn perhaps, and we have a small, not really so much of a settlement really, almost like an estate as it were, with complete with farming production facilities as well, which is it's kind of an interesting one. This I can only assume it was part of one of the map packs that I maybe haven't seen as of yet. There's a few heavily wooded areas in the map as well, and it is going to be a free-for-all as well. So it was also sent to me by Sin of the Dark Cloud. It's going to be 4 teams, each only with a single player on it. And it'll be quite interesting to see how this works, because it does look as though this is a rather open map in many areas, but there are a few little features such as hills, little fortified positions that maybe one of the players could potentially try and take up. There is also in the corner of the map as well, I've noticed, a river, something of a river anyway. We'll call it a tidal river and be generous and say that several sections of it are running dry at the moment, although the presence of trees in the path of the river would suggest that's not actually the case. But still, there are choke points in this corner of the map as well, which could be utilised. It'll be quite interesting to see if that is the case, as well as a network of roads that run through the map as well. Excuse me. At any rate, let's go through Sin's army first of all, considering he is the one who sent me the battle replay, so big thank you to him. He is playing as Numenor once again, and he has got some Ardenian shadow bows that are going to be skulking around in the trees, good as rangers, because of course they have that armour which most rangers do tend to lack, as well as still being able to dish out that punishment. If anyone does take up an overly defensive position when you have rangers, you can of course cut through large sections of their army without too many issues. Numenorian cohort, so Numenor of course in a free-for-all situation can really rely on their quality if they can get into a good shape, and the Numenorian cohort will be able to outperform most other infantry of this type in the game. They have a good amount of damage, nice armour of course, as most Numenorians are. They're a little bit more of an aggressive version of the Alcarondas Legion essentially. Numenorian steel bows, one of those units which is fairly difficult to use correctly, but if you do, then they're going to be good value because their armour-piercing arrows can really make short work of units that can otherwise be quite difficult to bring down. That would be the key, I would say, though. If you don't use them against elite units, then it's unlikely you'll actually get the value back off them because they have a very limited supply of ammunition. The Balagire archers, however, are very easy to get your money back on because they're very much at home shooting into anything they can, taking a bit of punishment, very good in a skirmish fight. Back here we have the Royal Legion of Armenelos with Ar-Pharazôn himself, so a heavy infantry unit. Of course, the additional men they have in the unit compared to other units of this type among the humans means they're head and shoulders above them really, and are more readily compared, I would say, to the dwarven units of this type, which shows their quality, I think. Pharazôn Swordmasters, on the other hand, are the best unit in class. They are the best heavy swordsmen in the game because of that third hit point. An extra hit point really does make an enormous difference, as I've kept saying throughout really all of my battle replays of late. If you add an extra hit point, it greatly increases the effectiveness of the unit without any other factors being considered like unit size and the like. It's a very significant factor. We've got some Seafarers of Neen Damos as well, so some javelins. Very efficient unit this because they're capable of doing quite a lot of damage with those javelins, and they can defend themselves in melee, and they're one of the cheaper units in the Numenor roster. They're not cheap, but Numenor in general are an expensive faction. And we have several units of Numenorian shield guard as well. Armour-piercing spears, fantastic for holding the line and slowly dealing that chip damage to enemies. There's also some Narun Aru Roar guard hidden out here in the trees, which are of course fantastic in a skirmish fight because their armour is so heavy. And they have spears as well, so not easy to kill them with cav. Then we have 2017 Harrison Wells, who is playing as Dol Amroth. He's got some Doran Urnal pikemen without the armour upgrade. I think maybe a second armour up, maybe like a tiered armour upgrade system has been employed for the Doran Urnal pikemen, because I don't recall them having a variant where they had sort of armour on their arms and they look bulkier than they used to for the first level. That may indeed be the case, but even so, the Doran Urnal pikemen, they're just going to be here to help hold down the line, act as the anchor. Ethalond men-at-arms, they're not going to be as good as stuff like the Numenorian cohort of course, but they are significantly cheaper than such a unit, so it gives you a bit more money to spend elsewhere. We also have some Doran Urnal swordsmen, some Tarnostian spearmen, so going a little bit more for numbers, infantry numbers this, for Dol Amroth, which is an interesting way to play them. We shall see if that pays off. We've got some Black Swan renegades, which armour piercing will be very useful against Numenor. I'm not sure who else is on the field today, but the Black Swan renegades should be useful for cracking through any armoured factions. Dol Amroth archers and Belfalas marines, so some archers and some basic javelins. More Tarnostians, more Black Swan renegades. So he's gone for 3 units. So going into the red limit on the Black Swans I don't think is really worth it. They're a decent unit, but I think they're a little bit expensive for what they are anyway, so going into the red limit on them is questionable for me. Dol Amroth swordsmen, and I did notice as well the Haven Guard are over here, which are another fantastic heavy sword unit, even if they're not as good as the Pharazim Swordmasters. And unsurprisingly, Dol Amroth going for a cavalry contingent of 2 units of Knights of the Silver Swan, and some really powerful melee cavalry in the Haven Knights. The third army we have is going to be an Orcish army. We have Steelbow Ranger, who's going to be playing as Angmar. He's got some Gundabad Guard, so some heavy spears. He's got some upgraded Guardians of Kharndoom and Witch Realm Pikemen. So Angmar, of course, very well known for being very hard to break down in the infantry sense. And that will be the case as well with heavy spears, upgraded heavy infantry, and heavily armoured pikes to back them up as well. Some Hammer Guard, which are the more aggressive bodyguard infantry they have. Maybe a little bit more risky to use, but they do huge arm-piercing damage with those rusted warhammers of theirs. We also have some Warg Riders back here, 2 units of them and some Witch Realm Inquisitors. Interesting to see who comes out on top of the cavalry fight between them and Dol Amroth. It would all come down, I think, to whether Dol Amroth can get a nice clean charge off on the Wargs to skewer many of them quickly. If they don't, then the anti-cavalry of the Wargs will come into play, and the rest of the Angmar army would appear to be hidden. There may be 1 unit over here, and indeed there is, of Trolls of Gundabad, but there probably is Snaga hidden in the trees, but more significantly I would say Barrow Wights. Angmar can be so difficult to get rid of when they fall back on their Barrow Wights. And finally we have an Elven faction as well, the Edge of the Blade, who is going to be playing as Mirkwood. He's got some Elders of the Elven King with their Silverthorn arrows and some Hiri Peng, so certainly in the ranged fight Mirkwood are going to have the beating of Angmar all day long. We shall see what Angmar do in response to that. Hiriak upgraded as well, so they're going to be good for holding the line, but if Angmar comes after them, they'll need more than just a single unit of spears to bar the way. Sindar of the Girdle are another really fantastic unit of cavalry when it comes to being in melee. They're also good at charging in, however, very much a jack of all trades, Sindar of the Girdle, but do take care that once their hit points are gone, they are quite fragile. Bows of Emondwyr are also over here, and they're already in range of the Trolls, so the Horse Archers opening up. The rest of the Mirkwood army is probably going to be quite difficult to see. There's some Hiri Lung and Hiri Auth that have got the armour upgrades back here as well, so the heavier units are visible. It does look as though this player has elected to go for a fair few of them, but of course Mirkwood, even not in tree cover, have got a lot of units that can hide, so it's certainly going to be the case when they start off in one of the more heavily wooded sections of the map. So without further ado, let's begin. And we will stay over here because Sin is further away than the 3 players over here who have elected to deploy relatively close to one another, perhaps angling for a way to try and get into the positions where they can use those choke points in the top left hand corner of the map. You can see here that the Horse Archers are firing in, but several of the arrows are missing, and of course Trolls like this are going to be able to withstand a lot of arrows in general, so I wouldn't really recommend going after them. As much as you can burn Trolls down from range with projectiles like that, because they are big, so you do stand a good chance of hitting them, I would only really go after Trolls if it was stuff like javelins or crossbows, stuff that's capable of doing a lot of damage, or charging in with lance cavalry. Wouldn't bother using arrows of that type on them at any rate. Meanwhile, you can see over here that Angmar are going to get back into a bit more of a defensive shape. A lot of their units revealing themselves. There are the Barrow Wights, lots of Snaga, some Orc Fellas as well, some armour piercing, which will be quite useful. Again, certainly Dol Amroth and Numenor, maybe slightly less Mirkwood because of the melee defense that Wood Elves tend to have. Trolls coming over here as well. Angmar finding themselves, however, in between Dol Amroth and Mirkwood. Numenor also creeping their way up the roads on this side of the map, also near to the lakes. Rather an interesting map, there's lots of features on it. So Mirkwood probably the ones looking fairly comfortable with their position here, to be honest with you. They're not moving forward because everyone else seems to be converging on one another. We shall see if the other players take note of that, because that is often a way that you can gain a bit of an advantage in a battle such as this. You can see here the Snaga archers starting to open up and going after the Dol Amroth pikemen, who are sticking out in front of the line infantry, so they are going to be vulnerable to these arrows, and basic as the Snaga archers may be, the Dol Amroth pikemen are pretty much the ideal target for them. So they will continue to fire, try and get some good value with those cheap units. the Gundabad Guard and the Wargs, so quite difficult for Dol Amroth to use their cavalry in this sort of situation. There's a few structures as well which might get in the way of them moving in. I mean, I'd be really careful of using the Knights of the Silver Swan here. If you're going to commit them to a situation like this, you need to send the Haven Knights with them. They are going to charge in. I mean, the Lancers are down. They could do a fair amount of damage, actually. The Gundabad Guard are moving. They do turn around, however. They get their shields pointing in the right direction, so they prepare for that. So not as much damage as could have been done there. They're going to need to get these Knights of the Silver Swan out. Harrison Wells throwing his cavalry under the bus there. Like I said, if you're going to keep them in melee there, I mean, you shouldn't because there are spears there anyway, but if you were going to commit them against Warg Riders like this, and Inquisitors, you really needed to send the Haven Knights with them. I don't know what people save their elite units like that for when you're perfectly willing to sort of throw other units under the bus. It's a very bizarre situation, and unsurprisingly, rightly, really, being punished for that with his cavalry routing. And so now, Dol Amroth, you can see they are boxing up because they can see what is going to be happening to them as Numenor approaching from the rear, Angmar approaching from the front. And this is going to be pretty painful for Dol Amroth, I would think. It was pretty clear this is the way the wind was blowing anyway. They needed to move. They couldn't just sit here and expect to get away with it. And already you can see what their tactics have wrought. Although it is going to be quite difficult if two players decide to single you out in a battle like this anyway. You can see javelins and arrow fire from Dol Amroth now being shot forth into the Angmarin as they get into position. I imagine Sin is not going to waste too much time. Some Snaga archers here on the flank, so you can see an agreement has almost certainly been reached here between Angmar and Numenor. Otherwise, these very vulnerable Snaga archers would be getting torn asunder by Numenorian infantry. And here you can see Snaga archers shooting right up the line here against the Doran Ernil. Interestingly enough, though, with such an agreement in place, Angmar and Numenor helping one another, they will be able to crush Dol Amroth between them fairly easily and fairly efficiently. Excuse me. This is where I'd be looking at Mirkwood to do something. It's all well and good sitting back if all of the players are just tearing lumps out of one another, but if you can see this sort of thing start to happen, you can't really afford to sit back, because undoubtedly Angmar and Numenor will probably keep their alliance going so that they can then take on the healthy Mirkwood, which is always going to be bad news for them. Belfast Marines throwing their javelins into the Barrow-wights and Snaga Stalkers. They'll kill off several of the Snaga Stalkers by doing such, but most of the Barrow-wights will probably get back up. Angmar, of course, very resilient to this sort of thing. You can see just waiting for someone to make the first move. I mean, one of Angmar or Dol Amroth really does need to be the ones to move in. I guess they don't, technically. They're using up their arrows as they please. I wonder what these steel bowmen are firing at. Let's go and have a look, shall we? Looks to be Black Swan Renegades. It's a good enough target, certainly one of the more dangerous units for Numenor to be facing off against. Cavalry here in the middle, and yeah, Dol Amroth are in significant trouble now. Sindar of the Girdle moving forward, so Mirkwood starting to send their cavalry up potentially to do some probing, but they only have 2 units of cav, so it's not likely to be too much of a problem. Also, Angmar in particular have got plenty of anti-cavalry. They've got their wargs, their melee knights, spears, pikes, all sorts. Very difficult to kill Angmar with cavalry in this sort of situation. Dol Amroth, though, being turned into pincushions somewhat. Belagair archers moving forward. And I suppose they may as well, because if they intend to keep this alliance going, they could crush Mirkwood later on with just pure martial strength in melee. And you wouldn't really want to be skirmishing with Mirkwood anyway, I suppose. Here you can see, you can tell they're Belagair archers because they don't have the black trails. Doran Ernil swordsman, Haven Guard, Dol Amroth slowly being picked off. Of course, this is really just tenderising them for the main event. Meanwhile, we hear the Realm Inquisitors and some wargs chasing the bows of Emondwyr off. Wood Elf and the Horse Archers like this are really difficult for Warg Riders to deal with, which Realm Inquisitors are a slightly different matter because of the significantly better armour that they have. Meanwhile, I mean, I suppose at this point Dol Amroth can't really do much other than just sort of sit here and hope that they can take a few with them it's going to be hard. Angmar and Numenor aren't really the ideal factions you want to be facing off against if you were in this situation. Backs to the wall as Dol Amroth are. Getting shot in the back as well, so going after the units that are pointing the wrong way, which means their shields are not coming into effect, which means you'll be getting more kills. There's also the Haven Knights, which are taking a bit of damage, pointing the wrong way as well, so only their armour and hit points will be helping them, their shields will not be. It's an interesting situation, this. I'd wonder why, actually, Numenor and Angmar have decided to come to this agreement against Dol Amroth. Seems like a strange one to me. Singling out this player in particular. Based on the committal of the cavalry, I would assume he's not exactly an experienced head at the game. But still, it's what's happening. And Mirkwood is doing nothing about it. In fact, Mirkwood has not even moved their infantry units. They've got their cavalry ready to rush forward should they see an opportunity, I suppose, but I highly doubt that's going to make too much of a difference. It is the perfect noob box, though, let's be honest. When you see a target like this, I suppose you kind of want to gang up on it, but initially it wasn't a noob box. It only turned into a noob box when Numenor was starting to threaten their flank, so they're also tiptoeing around the issue here somewhat. Now that they're here, you would kind of expect them to be Adonai shadow bows ripping through those poor Dorinurnal swordsmen with their body-piercing projectiles, trying to open up a hole so that Angmar can then smash through. I mean, it's a good example here of two teams working in unison, trying to surgically remove Dol Amroth from the game, and here you can see that a rather large hole is being opened up as a result of these pikes being moved from the line, and the Barrow-wights are going to shamble forwards. Good thing for Dol Amroth, the Barrow-wights are so incredibly slow. Narun and Iron Royal Guard are continuing to fire. Continuing to fire into the backs of those Haven Knights, which are still a concern. And here come Angmar now. They engage. And Angmar's Witch Realm pikemen, especially with the armour upgrade, are going to be superior to the Dorinurnal pikemen. You can see actually Mirkwood now charging into the Barrow-wights that have been left behind. A lot of damage being done there by the Sindar of the Girdle, so this is a little bit more like it from Mirkwood. If I were Mirkwood, I would still be pushing forward with my entire army, basically, and trying to shoot into the back of Angmar. Because at this rate, Angmar is very dangerous when they get momentum behind them. And Dol Amroth is not going to be able to stop them here. They'll be able to put up something of a fight, but especially with Numenor coming in from the other side, like this was always going to be the key. And now Dol Amroth sandwiched in every sense of the word. Some Adonai shadow bows over there, Belfalas Marines. You can see there the Witch Realm Inquisitor, so Angmar getting ready to try and guard against any further incursions from the Mirkwood cavalry. Eventually, of course, Numenor and Angmar will have to settle their differences in battle. But for now, they are very happy to share the spoils of victory against Dol Amroth, and there you can see more body-piercing ammunition being utilised. Snagar archers over there as well, so intertwining their units as well. It's dangerous if one of them decides to turn on the other here, Angmar and Numenor. It could mean doom, but of course in so doing they would effectively hand the victory to Mirkwood, so mutually assured destruction. As effective a deterrent as ever, I suppose. And then the Black Swans are routing, and yeah, like obviously Dol Amroth being put under this kind of pressure, a lot of their units are already starting to crumble under the pressure. Angmar, meanwhile, not capable of doing damage as quickly in melee as Numenor, and also, to be fair, I think the lines over here were a little bit more well prepared, mainly because they did send more units across when they took that damage from the Numenor Rangers. But Angmar, of course, more of a slow burn, the damage that they do. Certainly more defensive in nature. Simultaneously aggressive, but with defensive units. Rather an interesting juxtaposition there. Numenorian cohort waiting, so not committing everything Numenor, only committing what they need to. Numenorian cohort now charging in. They will easily have the beating of Tarnostian spearmen, especially as weakened as they are. More ranger ammunition coming in though, so he's going to get some friendly fire here, Sin, but the rangers have already dealt a hearty blow to Dol Amroth. And now Angmar pikemen coming forward. The Knights of the Silver Swan being committed into melee. That's not going to go too well. In a pike war like this, cavalry added to the front line, it's not really going to make any sort of impact. Belfalas Marines are shaken. Thalon men-at-arms doing their best to hold on to the flank. The Dol Amroth militia is now routing. Numenorian shield guard are here. Drawing their swords and axes now, the Numenor skirmishers. The Haven Knights are finally going to try and escape the box, the prison of their own making. How much damage they'll be able to do. I mean, at this point, if I were the Dol Amroth player, I would basically try and run these units into the corner, because that would be the only way that you would have any sort of impact in the late game. Although, to be fair, they are going to absolutely mow their way through these Snaga archers. Could go after them. I mean, Narun ERIADOR are on hand though. Spears of that nature, not exactly what you want to be seeing. And they're getting shot at point blank. It wasn't really a very good charge. Melee cavalry doesn't have a very good charge anyway, so when they don't get going in the first place, that is a problem. The trolls, of course, going up against primarily pikes. Unsurprisingly, the last infantry unit left standing over here against Angmar is the mighty Haven Guard. More routing units. And what have we got over here? Bows of Emondwyr. Snaga archers are routing. Sindar of the Girdle also over here. And of course now Mirkwood need to be... I mean, honestly, if this was Mirkwood's plan all along, what they really need to be doing is setting up in a defensive position in and around one of these choke points for me. Because they're in a position over here where it's wide open, and the same fate will befall them if, of course, this alliance between Numenor and Angmar holds. They could decide to go after one another. It would be foolish because it would hand the victory to Mirkwood, but they could. They've not been completely devoid of losses here, Angmar and Numenor. They have had to engage in melee after all, but you can see just from the corpses on the ground, very little in the way of Numenorian and Angmarin losses. So it was a clinical performance by Angmar and Numenor. And now, what happens from here? I wonder. Dol Amroth admit defeat. They are done out here. And I think, yeah, the cavalry is falling back, so honestly, there wasn't really much Dol Amroth could have done in that situation, given the hand they were dealt. Mirkwood, on the other hand, have missed an opportunity here to get their skirmishers into position and start giving the Angmar-Numenor alliance something genuine to think about. Now, they're going to be staring down the barrel of two largely healthy armies which are going to start to march towards them menacingly. Really, what I would say is this battle is... the most interesting thing about this battle is going to be seeing what happens between Angmar and Numenor towards the end, because in the back of these players' minds, they've got to be thinking, I want the other player to take more damage up against the foe we're ganging up on, so that when the time comes for us to fight one another, I have the advantage. How you best go about doing that, though, is interesting, because if your ally, in quotation marks, sees that you're obviously holding too much back and you're expecting them to do too much of the work, this fragile alliance could fall apart, and then it turns into a much more chaotic affair. Plenty to think about here. But I would assume the alliance is at least going to hold until the point where Mirkwood is engaged. It would be bad news bears for the Angmarim and the Numenorians if their alliance were to fall apart before that, because Mirkwood are, as of now, untouched. I think even their cavalry hasn't taken any losses really, because it did charge into the Barrow-wights, but I do not believe any Elven riders fell? Kind of hard to tell. Plenty of Dol Amroth cavalrymen strewn throughout the forest. What time of day is this? It's got more of a dawn type feeling to it, more so than dusk. Fresher lighting. Orc fellas, I mean, they've been saved. I'm not sure why. They would have been... Well, I guess you could save them later on against Numenor as well. They're not going to be terribly useful against Mirkwood, to be brutally honest. They'll get ripped apart on the approach, and the melee defense of Mirkwood, lower emphasis on armour. Clearly there's a lot of archers here for Mirkwood. Warns of Amon Lank, perhaps. Woodland Realm Patrol, the standard Hiri Peng. They've got the Elves of the Elven King. The problem is with this many archers, of course, it's going to be easier for the deadly duo to charge up to them and engage them in melee. They'll take some damage on the approach, but won't be too much of a concern. I do like the Numenorian unit models. They are pretty terrific. Someone certainly had a good time creating them. Meanwhile, Bows of Amenduir firing into Numenor, interestingly enough. I mean, the Numenorian legions that are leading the way are the heavily armoured and shielded mainline units. Elven arrows or no, it's going to be quite difficult to get through that Numenorian plate. And now they're going to be able to return fire, forming up the Cantabrian circle, which will mitigate some of the damage coming forth from the Numenorian archers, but ultimately any arrow that does hit is likely going to kill the Bows of Amenduir, because they're a very fragile horse archer. Very capable of doing damage, good range and damage for the type of horse archer they are, but as soon as they come under fire themselves, they're not heavily armoured at all, and they do fall in droves. So even with the shooting circle here, they're being fairly easily dealt with by the Numenorian firing lines, I would assume. Yeah, Naru and Aru Royal Guard still have ammunition. Very useful unit, very tough. Don't think there's any others. Well, there's some Balagar archers, they're just going to hide. And of course the Naru and Aru Royal Guard are also spears in melee, which may be the idea behind sending them forwards now. Get them into melee perhaps. Yep, they're drawing their spears. They are going to charge in. I'm very surprised Mirkwood hasn't seen this. I mean, they've got nothing else to focus on at this point in time. So, again, it's pretty poor. Probably a newer player, though. I've never seen the Edge of the Blade play the game before, so that would perhaps explain that. Yeah, they're wavering. You don't want to be getting too close to those spearmen. He is going to get away, so they won't rout at the very least, but yeah, they definitely need to wave off from this situation. Another volley from the arrows coming in, out of shooting circle as well. More of these poor horse archers going to fall as they try to get away. That delay also gives Numenor the ideal excuse to lag behind a little bit and let Angmar take the first engagements. All of this upgraded heavier Mirkwood infantry, however, going to be pretty good actually for taking on anything they come across, really. Certainly Angmar, but also Numenor. The problem is going to be I don't think they'll have enough in the end. They certainly won't if Angmar and Numenor decide to continue their alliance. And now Numenor also rolling forwards. Of course, because we can see exactly where Numenor's units are, we can see they don't have units hidden off to the side of the map to bring in later. A classic tactic in a free-for-all such as this. More Bows of Amenduir ammunition coming forth, but all it will take really is to peel off one unit of archers, a couple more volleys, and already they don't really represent as much of a threat because there's only 13 of them remaining. Flaming ammunition from Mirkwood. Interesting to see them using that and grilling some of the wargs. To be fair, getting rid of the wargs to a certain extent will allow them to use their Sindar of the Girdle more freely. They're quicker than the Witch Realm Inquisitors, so they could outmaneuver them. I think those were Silverthorn shots, were they not? Not entirely sure what they'd be doing going after Snaga, but maybe they just want to dump their ammunition quickly because they can see what way the wind is blowing. If that's the case, then fair enough. Just flick all your units onto fire at will. Try and get as many arrows down range as you possibly can. Warns of Amon Lenk revealing themselves. Another very dangerous unit, because they're ranged and melee prowess. Anti-armor going to be useful against Numenor and Angmar as well. Meanwhile, Bows of Emondui are charging in. A forlorn hope, if ever I saw one. Routing in the face of the professional soldiery of Numenor. Flaming shots. Doesn't do extra damage, of course. It does morale damage, but Numenor, you do very well to rout Numenor. Poison shot. Numenor are only really going to be showing signs of routing towards the end when they're flagging and losing the battle. You're not likely to be able to do it in this sort of situation. Silverthorn's also knocking over some of the Numenorian shield guard. Numenor, once again, it looks as though they're going to use the same playbook here. Go to opposite sides of the army they have singled out and try to sandwich them. Numenor, though, are the ones taking a little bit more, or garnering a little bit more attention from the enemy skirmishers at this stage. But of course they took so little damage against Dol Amroth that they can afford to take a few losses. I think it's also more significant that Angmar keep their army together than Numenor. Angmar need to work as a cohesive unit a bit more than Numenor, who can rely on individual quality more so. But we shall see. Mirkwood may very well not win the battle here, but they could prove to be the kingmakers, depending on who they decide to go up in. Sending the Sindar of the Girdle in as well. I mean, last samurai-esque this, as the Numenorian steel bows with their armour-piercing arrows tear through the Sindar of the Girdle. Yeah, and it's not looking good. And they're also going to charge into the spears, of all things, so it was definitely not a vintage cavalry display here. But at least they died in battle. A glorious, doomed charge, if ever I saw one. You can see here, and a good example perhaps of the very good melee defense of the Sindar of the Girdle. Pretty much any other cavalry unit of this sort would have already perished. But they do have a lot of melee defense, which makes them harder to hit. But ultimately, of course, the outcome was the same, even if they were able to last just a little bit longer. Angmar, meanwhile, going to be starting to move forwards. Not a lot of attention being pointed in their direction. More of the arrows perhaps looking towards Numenor. With Angmar moving forward, they do need to start shooting at them as well, I think, Mirkwood. Like I said, they need to just be looking at this from how much damage can we truly do perspective. Because I think that winning the battle at this stage is highly, highly unlikely. What are the Hiri shooting at? Shooting in here? Are they? Doesn't look like it actually. It looks like they're actually shooting at... yeah, they're all shooting at Numenor, really. Sin probably cursing his fortune at this point. While they are shooting into the front of heavily armoured and shielded units, he's still taking losses that Angmar are not at this point. Perhaps it comes down to Numenor being in open terrain. A little bit easier to see what you're shooting at, as opposed to Angmar. Silverthorn's going their way as well. And this is a lot of damage that the elves can chuck out, of course. Meanwhile, here are the Warg Riders, charging right into the Greenwood Watchers, who are an assassin unit, throwing their daggers in there. I don't think the Warg Riders actually saw them, and there are the Ents as well. Skulking around in the trees, and Mirkwood actually pulling off an ambush there, and Steelbow Ranger is cavalry leaving with a bloodied nose. Or snout, I suppose, seeing as they are wargs. And now, throwing daggers also being utilised on the Barrow-wights. Not a bad choice of target, because those daggers are high damage, so you will be able to soften the Barrow-wights up quite nicely. But, to coin that phrase, the noose is tightening on Mirkwood. And Mirkwood simply don't have the numbers to cover every angle. Are those... So we have 3 units of Greenwood Watchers. That's very interesting. He's going to throw his daggers in. Is he? Is he going to get a throw off? He is. Manages to do some damage to those trolls, but in the end he's just going to get swamped by Snaga and trolls. Here come some orc fellas. Axemen against trees. lone tier axemen, but there's so many orc fellas that they have actually found the unit of Mirkwood infantry, you would call the Ents, against which the orc fellas would actually be most effective. And then of course there's wargs coming in here as well, so the Ents are not going to be able to hold this down all on their lonesome, and that is going to be the problem ultimately. Greenwood Watchers are going to charge in. A unit seldom seen really, and they're going after the Barrow Whites. Dark green against teal, the robed units. Meanwhile, damage is being done here. Return fire from Numenor. There are the Adonai shadow bows as well, and you can see Numenor more at home taking damage as Mirkwood in dire straits really. They just don't have the ability to withstand as much punishment. There are the trolls who will do quite nicely against lighter units like the Greenwood Watchers here. Going to smash through them. I don't think the Greenwood Watchers are AP in melee either, I think it's just their projectile. If they were AP in melee, that would help them significantly. And you can see the Ents here just getting overwhelmed. There are just too many axe-wielding orcs around here for them to survive for too much longer. A lot of wargs, a lot of Witch-Realm Inquisitors. Angmar probably looking pretty favourably on their current situation. And Mirkwood at this point, I think they just want to do some damage. They're going to close into melee. They will do a bit of damage as well. I mean, they're charging in with their heavier units, including some armour piercing here against Numenor. So once again, Numenor really are the ones who are going to take a little bit more damage than Angmar. You can see over here some Hiri Lung who have already taken some substantial losses. Not likely to make much of an impact against Pharazim Swordmasters. Over here in the middle, though, they'll kill off a few. And like I said, while Numenor will win fairly comfortably, ultimately, it's looking like they will take more damage than Angmar, which may be the ultimate deciding factor. Has Numenor effectively doomed their chances of winning the battle as a whole by playing to this alliance for too long? It's possible. I mean, certainly the Angmar and Numenor players are the more experienced of the bunch here, picking on the new players. No honour in such things, but one of them ultimately has to pay the price for that, and it may very well end up being Numenor, although some Hiriath are coming across as well, so some heavier units, but Greenwood Watchers being rolled up, Warg Riders in support as well, so yeah, those Hiriath are going to get swallowed whole very quickly, enveloped. Hiriak moving in should be enough to catch those Warg Riders, maybe rout them. Doing their best. Angmar also holding some units back for later. You can see over here some of these archers as well. Elders of the Elven King. I'm surprised they're not winning this fight actually. They should be against Balagire archers, and undoubtedly they will as soon as their melee expertise starts to take hold. But Numenor winning, able to surround and destroy the Mirkwood sally forth that they had to face. Aru Royal Guard as well, still alive, still in good shape. Yeah, I mean, Numenor, to be fair, they may have taken more arrow fire, but they withstood it pretty well. And ultimately, maybe they are in better shape than Angmar, to be honest. It's kind of hard to tell though. Angmar can hide so many of their units in trees that it can be quite difficult to tell, and Mirkwood at this point routing all over the place. It takes a lot to rout elves. And there you can see the Orc fellas victorious, and still in fighting shape as well, which will be useful when it comes to dealing with Numenor. The Angmar cavalry already pulling out wide. I mean, now would be the time, certainly, to start thinking about trying to hit Numenor with some cavalry charges, I think, from an Angmar perspective. And then get your front line set and try to outlast them. It's a risky game to play, but Angmar don't have many other options, really. There are the Hiriak running away. And he's pulling his cavalry out wide. You can see he's already getting in place, ready for the Numenor advance, but it's a scary Numenor army still. They still have really all of their important aspects, the armour-piercing spears, the high-damage line infantry, and of course the two bodyguards here units. I don't know how much ammunition they have left necessarily, probably not much. But in melee, still a real powerhouse. Kind of a boxy formation being set up here as well. Belagire archers pulling back. I mean, interestingly enough, Mirkwood is still here on this battlefield, sort of in between the two warring factions. And they still have ammunition, and they're going to shoot point blank into Numenor. Try to kill off a few more of them. They're getting their bows back out, so I'd be impressed if he's managed to conserve some steel bow ammunition until this point in the battle. He's getting shot point blank though. And they are just going to charge in here, Mirkwood. Mirkwood have clearly marked their more hated enemy as Numenor, and they are going to charge in here. And Elders of the Elven King are going to require something significant to deal with. In much the same way as the Wardens of Amon Lank, Numenor could just roll in here, surround and crush them with force, but they're going to need to do so before Angmar arrive. I think fortunately for them, Angmar are caught a bit flat-footed by this, and they won't be able to get forward in time. Because Numenor are out of shape here, which would be the ideal time for Angmar to move forward, but I don't think they're going to do so. All they're going to be counting on is that Mirkwood can do a little bit more damage to Numenor. Seafarers of Nindamos will struggle against these elven units, so they will score a few more kills, to be sure. Forward come the Royal Legion of Armenelos as well. I mean, quality-wise, Numenor is still in a good place. Orc fellas going around the flank. That cavalry is a concern there. The mobility belongs to Angmar in this fight because of that, but Numenor have got all the tools they need to zone that out. They should do anyway. Not often you see the Elders of the Elven King shaken when there are 38 of them still remaining. And there are the Pharazim Swordmasters arriving, showing what a real heavy swordsman can do. And Angmar just waiting here again. I think this is a misplay, honestly, from Angmar. They should be taking advantage of the fact that Numenor have had to collapse in on this, these two units, essentially, and they're not in a good position to accept an assault. So I think Steelbow Ranger effectively dragging his heels here could be what costs him the battle. Because if they go blow for blow with Numenor, I'm not sure they can win. They'd be reliant on their pikes to do that. Their pikes and their manoeuvrability with their cav. And that's a dangerous game to play. They're moving forward now, but it's a little bit too late. So which of these two will ultimately win through? There's not many Elders of the Elven King left. 19 remain. Is Thranduil? Oh yeah, he's in the Hiri Pang unit and he's running away. Interesting. Angmar are arriving now, but it's going to be too late. Numenor are going to have just enough time, I think, to reorganise themselves into a shape. And they will need to do exactly what they punished Dol Amroth for doing in the early game, and forming a box, really, because they need to stop that Angmaran cavalry from charging in. Focused around melee, though the Wargs and the Inquisitors may be, the massive cavalry can still do damage off a charge. Most of these units for Angmar are defensive, the Hammer Guard really the exception there. Incredibly damaging. So then, fairly key is if Numenor rather, do they still have those steel bows, or were they largely wiped out in that final Mirkwood charge? Not seeing many steel bowmen. Well, the steel bows are here actually, and they do still have a bit of ammo. They just run out. They only have one volley left. Well, regardless of that, so here EX is still Mirkwood alive and still intent on charging in and trying to soften up Numenor. Don't know what loyalty they have to Angmar, but here they go. Not a lot of damage is going to be done here. They'll rout almost immediately. Even elves are not going to enjoy this. Royal Legion of Armenelos, Shield Guard that are in formation. Not any actual losses yet though. And there they go. Mirkwood are done. And now then, what will happen? The allies throughout this entire game, they have dealt with the competition that they both faced at the early stages, but now, how do they approach one another? Quality-wise, Numenor have the edge, but Angmar, of course, have got some nice synergy. 3 trolls remaining, not going to be all that useful, I don't think, against a force like this from Numenor, because as soon as they even so much as touch anything like Pharazim Swordmasters, or even the armor-piercing spears, they're going to be in substantial trouble. No ammunition from either side at this stage, I don't think. Snaga. What's going on there? Numenorian steel bows. Being attacked by the trolls. We shall see if the steel bows have what it takes. So then. I mean, Snaga are being sent over in support. Barrow Whites perhaps. I mean, as long as they can engage where the pikes aren't, Numenor will be feeling pretty good about the situation, but that cavalry is going to make them feel pretty claustrophobic, I would have thought. If they choose the wrong target to charge into, though, that cavalry melts pretty fast. The Snaga trying to move in. The Ardenium Shadowbows and the Seafarers coming in to bail them out, and because it's only Snaga they're really facing, it's not going to go very well for them. Having said that, Barrow-wights on the way forward. We'll start to see what way this fight is going fairly quickly, I think. And it could be that Mirkwood's choice to focus on Numenor a little bit more and be the kingmaker in that way could give the battle to Angmar. Forward comes from Gundabad Guard. Pharazim, there's still 47 Pharazim Swordmasters though. I mean, that's... The cavalry is looking for a gap to try and exploit. Forward come the Guardians of Khan Doom. The Belagair Archers and cohort are going to lurch forward, but this is where the Witcher and Pikemen are, so it's going to be difficult, I think, for Numenor to win over here. They're going to have to rely on winning fights such as this. Still 2 trolls remaining. If these steel bows still have ammunition, it would explain why Sin's trying to save them so much. The Naru and Aru Royal Guard charging forward, going to try and catch up to that cavalry, and they will manage to do so. The wargs are not going to enjoy that at all. They're going to be able to pull through the spearmen there. Getting hung up on them there. Witcher Inquisitors just sort of standing there and taking it. Trolls are there. I mean, over here they'll do much better because of the Pharazim Swordmasters. But even here, you've got the Witcher Hammer Guard coming in here and equalising the fight. I think it's just a matter of Numenor not having quite enough. I mean, one swift charge in the back from the Warg Riders, and I think it will probably be all she wrote. And Sin would agree, I think, because he's trying to get his shield guard in the way. Royal Guard as well. I think they may need more support over here on this front line, and yeah. It's looking like Angmar are just going to have too much left in the tank. Here comes some Orc Fellas as well. The 2 units of Orc Fellas that were still in reserve, and they're going to be able to charge into the rear as well, and that should be that. Numenor don't have the numbers to deal with this. It's going to be a slow demise for Numenor, because so much of Angmar's units based around keeping themselves alive for as long as possible. They're just going to charge in with their Orc Fellas. Numenor now surrounded, feeling the heat. In come the Orc Fellas. I mean, they will lose fairly substantially to these Shield Guard, but it's just the fact that they're getting attacked from multiple angles now that is going to bring about their demise, I think. I mean, if they can fight their way out of it, it won't be on the back of any sort of strategy, really. It will just be on unit positioning and overall quality. A few shaken units, though. Guardians of Khan Doom shaken. Routing could be one possible avenue to success. Which Inquisitors need to charge in, and they will do so. Not the best of charges, to be honest with you, but it's going to pull them out of shape a little bit. This other unit of Orc Fellas charged into the Naru and Aru Royal Guard, again, just getting all up in Numenor's business. Wargs charging in, doing more damage. The Royal Legion are holding things down on the front line, but the presence of pikes is... If it weren't for the pikes being here, I mean, even the pikes looking like they might rout though, which is surprising. I mean, losing the general here could be a possible way for Numenor to be successful here, but the Hammer Guard is still very much alive. Pharazim Swordmasters taking losses even with the backup that they have. Warg Riders are charging in, going to do some damage to the Seafarers, pulling them off the front line. Angmar doing all the right things here, I would say. If Numenor do manage to pull this out of the bag, like I said, it will be due to the quality of their units rather than anything else. You can see over here that the Orc fella's very much outclassed, but still making sure that these shield guardsmen can't get onto the front line. And then you can see Barrow-wights just shoring things up. Slowly but surely Numenor running out of manpower on the front line. They need these shield guards to turn around really, but the fellas being there makes that impossible until they have been dealt with. More Numenorian shield guards and Warg Riders loitering around here as well. Witch Realm Inquisitors who have charged in. We need to be careful not to spend too long in melee. Witch King himself is here. Now he's going to leave. Seafarers, 8 of them are routing. Even smaller units like that showing signs of routing, however, is a bad sign. They put up a good fight here, Numenor, but in the end it's just going to come down to, and again, Mirkwood made their choice really. They decided to go after Numenor more than Angmar. And that has been the difference maker here. That was always going to be the risk for either Numenor or Angmar. They allied with one another stoically until all other threats had been eliminated. One of the two of them was always going to be in worse shape after that had happened though. And unfortunately for Numenor, it was they. And Angmar will be able to take advantage of that. Evenly matched fight over here. Oof, those wargs. I suppose it's still possible. It's kind of hard to tell with the trees, but Royal Legion of Armanelos, 43 of them remain. There's just too many tanky units from Angmar. Shield Guard being prevented from getting onto the front line really by being cycle charged, and they have also turned around, so that's going to be a nice charge. Slaying many of those potentially very useful units. They need to be careful of their general though, the Angmarin. That's where he is after all. Victory over here. I think the Pharazim Swordmasters, only 9 of them, but they're going to try and combine their forces, condense them into a blob, but in come Angmar. More Gundabad Guard. The armour piercing could be useful. There's still 40 Hammer Guard. Another unit of Barrow-wights as well. Combined with the pikes and such, it's just going to be too difficult to do the damage to Angmar that Numenor need to quickly. Still some Orc fellas alive, which is kind of surprising. Probably not for all that much longer, I would imagine. Some Wargs, some Inquisitors. And there goes our Pharazon. Barrow-wights and pikes. A thorn in their side. There's still 35 Royal Legion over here. I mean, they've kept themselves alive very admirably indeed. But it's all over for them. A valiant effort. Not sure how I feel about the 2 experienced players picking on the 2 newer players, but I suppose it's a harsh lesson that maybe they will learn, or maybe they've been frightened off from playing the mod in the future. The risk that you take when employing such tactics. But Angmar victorious, able to withstand the punishment throughout the entire battle, and that's what's seen them over the line here. Heavy spears, heavy infantry, heavy pikes, Barrow-wights. All of these units are what Angmar's victory has been built upon. Not a huge amount left though, you'd have to say, from Angmar. A pocket here definitely counts as a close free-for-all. An interesting one as well, as far as the politics of a free-for-all goes. And that, I think, was the last... Yeah, there it is. A real mess all throughout the field over here as well. The bright blue tabards of Dol Amroth, but there, you can see Numenor getting the most kills, but ultimately the victory belongs to Angmar. I don't think you can really say that the most kills deserves the moral victory on this occasion, purely because of the kind of battle that it was. It wasn't as if you got those kills, either Angmar or Numenor. Neither of them got their kills purely from their own merits. They built off one another, which is fairly key. Dol Amroth, of course. I feel a bit sorry for Dol Amroth, especially, to be fair, because at least Mirkwood had a notable impact on the outcome of the battle because of the player they decided to go after in Numenor. Dol Amroth, unfortunately, though, got crushed underfoot. And the name of this battle as well was Kill the Campers, but I'm not entirely sure you can say that. I mean, yes, they formed a nuke box, Dol Amroth, and Mirkwood didn't move, but Dol Amroth only really formed up that box when it was clear they were going to be attacked from both sides. So I'm not really sure. I think that's pretty harsh on them, to be honest with you. But still, let's see what did the damage for Numenor. Yeah, 382 kills on the Rangers, the Adonai Shadow Bows, which on a more open map like this is an impressive return. It's only really in siege battles with choke points you expect them to get upwards of 500. Numenorian Shield Guard doing well as well. Like, they're a very dependable unit. A spearman that's capable of doing damage is exactly what you want to have. Pharazim Swordmasters 218, Royal Legion of Armenelos were more tanky but less damaging, so there you can see the difference between the two. And the other units all doing just sub of 100, but decent enough, I suppose. But yeah, thank you to Sin of the Dark Cloud for sending this one to me, and a big thank you to the other players for being a part of this battle as well. Been a little while since I showed a free-for-all, and I haven't seen this map before, so that's the reason why I did this one at the time I did. As of now, it's still within 2020, but we are a couple of days away from 2021, just to give an idea of when I'm actually recording this. And like I've said in the past few battle replays, I'm still saying it just because it hasn't happened yet, but I should have a better idea by this point, and I should have already relayed, really, what's going to be happening with the channel moving forward. At least there are two very clear pathways in front of me at this point, and I will be sort of relaying those, I think, in the form of a live stream if the internet is willing to cooperate with me. If not, then I will do so in the form of a good old channel update video, which, if that's the case, then the channel update video will probably come after this battle at some stage, probably just before or just after this battle, because if I'm not mistaken, this will probably be in the towards the end of the second week of January. This battle replay is probably going to be coming out. By that time I'll probably be releasing a channel update video as well. But yeah, things are moving forward in that regard as well, which of course means my channel will have to be prepared for the inevitable change as well. We will not be able to carry on the status quo for too much longer, one way or the other. But regardless of that, I probably already would have gone through that in some other way. As for what's coming next, I think, well, there's a few sieges I could do next. Maybe I'll do the Merlond one. It's been a little while since I showed Merlond. Merlond is not my favourite map, to be honest with you, because it tends to work out in the same way each time. Hopefully that's not going to be the case again, but we'll see. We'll see what I feel like recording in another session, because this is my last one of the day. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.